we grew up with it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm younger than the first iPhone.
Yeah.
Like, I've never lived in a world without the first iPhone.
You just made someone watching this be like, oh, At Axis, we believe the conversation around smartphones is very, very important. But one thing we've noticed is that parents and teens often have different perspectives about their phones. And so we decided to sit down with some teens and ask them what they think about their smartphones. So today I'm joined by Carly, Wyatt, and Isa, and we're just gonna have a conversation going through some questions about what teens think about smartphones. So I sent you guys the questions already, but let's start at the beginning. What is something that you would say you like about your smartphone?
For me, I've been in a military family, so I've moved around a bunch. So I think the main thing that like immediately comes to mind is just like connectivity, like being super connected really quickly, because I have family in other countries and it's like really easy to just text them and figure out how they're doing.
The main thing for me is the versatility of it and the convenience of it. I mean, having like a camera, a notepad where you can write stuff down, encyclopedias, the internet, all just like in this little package that's convenient for most times.
You think about how multifaceted it is. It's pretty crazy when you think about all the things. Like, I think there's the picture going around the internet where it's just all the things that a phone is like, all the things you'd have to put in your pocket to be the equivalent of a phone. And it's just a whole table of stuff just 30 years ago, right? Carly, what's something you like about your phone?
I would agree with Isa. I think my favorite thing is the connectivity. Also, I would say that I value social media as a part of that, being able to keep up with what my friends are doing that aren't in my direct circle that I don't see every day. And yeah, of course, keeping up with parents and family members is really important. So
the other side of it, at Axis, we care a lot about the conversation of what's good, what's bad, and what does the Bible have to say about it. So the other side of it is like, what's something maybe you don't like about your phone? Let's start with you again, Carly.
One thing that I don't like is just how addictive it is. I know that that's like the easy answer because we would all agree with that, but I feel like I just find myself getting sucked in. I'll get a text and then I'll go to answer the text and then I'll find that I'm like, before I know it, I'm scrolling on something else and then I'm checking my email and then I'm just doing everything that there is to do on my phone. And I feel like that's really hard to avoid.
So, I mean, I think you're the only one who does.
Yeah.
For sure.
Wyatt, what's something that you don't love about your phone?
Pretty similar to Carly's answer. It's just the pure distraction factor of it. I mean, there's so many like apps and other media sites and stuff that are just trying to send you notifications, keep you coming back, keep you revisiting things. And it's hard to focus a lot of the time because you'll get a notification and then that leads down the trail of like, oh, now I got to check this and this and this. Watch a new episode of something.
Isa, are you kind of in the same boat?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the amount of times I like open my phone, do stuff, and then turn it off and like, wait, I had it here for a reason and I didn't even do it. And I also feel like it just really shortens your attention span as well.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
I feel like just as a generation that we've grown up with phones and like TV and like that kind of a thing, just really like I find myself like I only interested in a couple things for a little bit and I'm like, okay, great, and then I'm done. I feel like that with a phone.
Yeah, one thing I talk about with parents all the time is I think students and teens understand some of the negatives of phones often better than parents do, but then also sometimes more than parents realize. I think it's one, kind of growing up with it a little bit, but I think it's two, also like I think we hear lots of negative things about phones. So I like to start with positive, but we want to be honest and say, hey, sometimes there are downsides. One of the things I wanted to talk about is related to something Isa and Carly said about that connectivity thing. Because I've been noticing this as a trend as I've been talking to more students, is that sometimes that can feel like a negative, almost like you can't escape being connected. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. I'll just leave it open-ended, but do you have any thoughts about that? Or
I have a thought that I was going to mention. I feel like when we're so connected with people through like text or social media or anything of that nature, it limits our ability to connect in real life with those people because there's nothing to catch up about.
Yeah.
When we're always talking like WID, like always filling each other in on what's happening, it's like, then you see each other in real life. It's like,
yeah, I actually intentionally try not to text people sometimes so that when I hang out with them in person, we have something to talk about, because there have been times like with my friends that I show up and we're hanging out and I'm like super excited to hang out with them. And then we just kind of are like,
Yeah.
All right. All right, we're here. Yeah, I was talking with another student too, and she was just talking about the stress of waking up every morning and having like all of the Snapchat streaks to do and just all of that stuff. Do you feel that at all? Like feeling like you always have to respond to everyone as quickly as possible?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's this expectation that develops recently of like being available to respond within like hours, minutes, sometimes like seconds,
Yeah.
when it's such a contrast from like way back when you'd
Yeah.
like send emails, or even further back than that,
Yeah.
just mail. That's
Yeah.
like months, weeks.
Issa, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with like Carly and Wyatt, but I also think I make up a lot more excuses for myself because of like, oh, I'm sorry, I just saw your text, and then I feel horrible because I did not just see it
Yeah.
or whatever.
The white lies we
yeah,
we all tell. I'm listening.
yeah.
I will raise my hand and say I do
Well,
that
it's like-
sometimes too.
Or like I get dread at seeing some certain people's messages, and like then like it ruins like my whole day. I'm like, oh, I have to at some point like gather the mental. I don't know.
You
It's
don't
just
have the-
like
it feels like you don't have the emotional capacity
Yeah,
to
to,
like, do it. It kind of leads into the next question. I think around that, I think is maybe a good place to start. But what are like some boundaries you feel like what are some boundaries you set around your phone? And maybe what are some that you feel like you should set around your phone? Like, is there a time where you can be unavailable, or do you feel like, because I think sometimes, if we're being honest, sometimes it's parents, right? Who are like, if you don't text me back in 5 minutes, I am going to call you and like, what are you doing right now? Right. And so do you feel like you have the ability to set up boundaries around your phone?
so I've never really been a lot more like in social media and stuff, but like I recently got Instagram or something. But from the very start, I'm a very like I have a very short attention span, like I was saying. So I already set myself like time limits on my phone.
Yeah.
Like you can set on certain apps and then like only 20 minutes. But then it says, oh, your time limit is up. And I'm like, okay, just remind me in 15 minutes. And then I keep on scrolling. And so it's like a boundary, like, oh, I set a boundary, but it's following through with them. That can be kind of hard.
Something I've been trying to use more is the bedtime feature of just like cutting off certain things and certain like notifications after a certain time. Of like, that's something I've been trying to do recently is like past 10 p.m. I'm not going to just respond immediately or do anything like that.
And it's like your phone tells people, hey, this person has do not disturb on.
Yeah.
But even then you're like, I sometimes, this is just me, you don't have to agree with me, but sometimes when I turn do not disturb on, I check my phone more because I'm like, did someone text? Because you have to, you have to physically check your phone.
Like,
for-
who's trying to disturb me?
It's like, oh, does anyone text me? And so sometimes it kind of backfires. I'm not here necessarily to give you advice, but one of the things I tend to do is I tend to uninstall apps if I don't want to use them. And so I can reinstall them, and it's very easy to do that, but it adds just a little bit of friction that makes me pause instead of just automatically getting back into those habits. Do you have any boundaries that you set around your phone, Carly?
So one thing that's similar to what you just mentioned is just I will remove certain apps from my home screen that I don't want to be in the habit of checking constantly. And then another one that I've been trying to get better at is not checking my phone first thing in the morning. I feel like that's a habit that like everybody who owns a phone is kind of in. It's like you wake up, you're like, what happened while I was asleep? And so I've been trying to do other things while getting ready for school or whatever, and then check it later in the morning, which is kind of the opposite of what you were saying about like bedtime.
Yeah.
So morning versus evening, taking a break at some point in the day.
Yeah, not immediately grabbing your phone is very hard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Talking about the conversation with parents and how I sometimes, as someone who's kind of in between in those ages, like I'm not quite the age of a parent of a teen, but I'm also not a teen. I just noticed as I talk to kind of both groups, I feel like there's sometimes some misunderstanding about what people think about phones. What is something that you think parents don't understand about the way that you see your phone or the way that you use your phone? Can you like identify some of that disconnect, or are you like, my parents 100% get it?
The closest thing for me is just how integrated it is into like youth culture and the way that we live, because we grew up with it. Like I'm younger than the first iPhone.
Yeah.
Like I've never lived in a world without the first iPhone.
You just made someone watching this be like, oh my God. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
But that means that every time I'm thinking about like a map or something, I'm usually thinking about like, oh, using Google Maps or something. And maybe more parents think like, oh, you can just figure it out on the way there, like pull up a map.
When parents are so quick to restrict usage of something like a phone or something like social media, it can sometimes be like a hindrance to a kid who's missing out on part of culture.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like when having a cell phone, like you're not in the group chat because everybody's talking about something that you're not a part of, or everybody's referencing something that happened on social media that you didn't hear about. It's not always a bad thing, but it can be like hard to connect.
Yeah, and it feels isolating maybe a little bit. That's really good. Isa?
Yeah, I like definitely agree with, because I didn't have a phone for most of my life, which I'm really thankful for actually. But I think there's like definitely like a disconnect between the way we use our phones as teens among our peers who've always had phones as well, and then versus the way that they use their phones like our parents do.
So staying on parents, do you see maybe a difference in the way that your parents use their phones versus the way that you use your phones?
More than a difference, there's a similarity. We're all addicted to our phones. And I feel like as parents become more connected with especially social media, they become more empathetic with the way that we can't seem to draw ourselves away from it. You know, like as they experience it themselves, they're like, oh, this is sucking me in. And
one small thing I'd say is tech literacy, of like understanding like having it be intuitive to like go through menus or like figure out where things are and all that. That's something I think we have done since we were much younger. So it's a lot more second nature to us, while they had to kind of learn it. So it's more foreign.
Yeah. I feel like definitely agree with what you guys were saying. But I think they, at least for like what seeing my parents like react to their phones, or as well as just other like parental figures that I have, is just the way I don't think there's as much pressure to be as connected as we feel. Be like, oh, I have to text this person back, or they're not like, I'm more likely to get into like a texting conversation of like hours versus my parents or something like that.
That's always like a good self-awareness to have of how much do I use my phone if I'm gonna like, and it is a little bit of that, not necessarily, because I don't know if it's necessarily like a sin, right? Obviously, where we put our focus is very important biblically. And we just used a John Mark Comer quote where basically it's like, where we place our attention is inevitably who we become, which I find very fascinating. So if we want to be more like Christ, like we put our attention on Christ. But as our attention is constantly being pulled away, understanding, hey, as an adult, my attention is also being demanded from my smartphone. And at Access, we like to talk a lot about how sometimes that design is against us, right? And I do think there's a point with like growing up with it where it's just integrated into your life. But then there's also, Carly, you kind of touched on that a tiny bit, but how our phones are designed to be engaging, right? And so it's like we were kind of handed a bad hand. Like we don't want our phones to be obtuse and obnoxious and, you know, have a lot of friction, right? But we also, they're so easy to use and they're so engaging that it sometimes is like, it's hard to put it down and you're constantly checking it, or, you know, those sorts of things. So, okay, let's take the focus back to maybe teens. What advice would you give your peers when it comes to their smartphones? If you were to give them a piece of advice, what advice would you give them?
What I would say is evaluate what's like adding to your life on your phone. Because there's a lot of apps that are fun to be on for certain periods of time and stuff, but they're not really, by the end of it, you're just like, oh, I just wasted like a couple hours or something like that. So evaluate what's like creative, what's adding to your life in some way, and maybe switch some things up if you see a problem.
Definitely.
I feel like kind of what you were saying with the time limit and giving it like to a friend. I think it'd be like giving accountability to others and not yourself, because you know your own weaknesses, and being honest about that. And it's okay to be struggling, because like a lot of people struggle with this. Like I struggle with being on my phone all the time and procrastinating on like schoolwork and stuff like that. So I feel like just, you know, just being, sharing with a friend, like, hey, I just really been struggling with this. Can you like pray for me, or like figure out ways to like hold each other accountable, and like not to be afraid to do that.
That's so good.
Yeah. Something that ties into both of the past questions is just the design of the phone and of the different apps is, it all can be used for good. Like there is so much out there on social media and on the internet that is inspiring and uplifting. And so kind of like you were saying, like stepping back and saying like, is this inspiring me? Is this making me a better person? Is this bringing, you know, hope and joy into my life? Or is this just wasting my time or making me feel worse about myself?
Okay, we're going to get into maybe bigger picture answers and we'll probably wrap. But what would you say a healthy relationship with a phone looks like? And maybe for yourself, maybe just in general.
For me, I would say that a healthy relationship with my phone looks like staying in touch, staying connected, using it for the good things that it can help me with, and choosing to take breaks when I feel like I'm too addicted to it or I'm spending too much time on it, and really having that maturity and self-awareness to like take those breaks when needed.
Yeah, totally. That's just about what I was going to say, is knowing when to use it and essentially using it as a utility, because that's how it works best, is when it's used as a tool. And like when you need to communicate with someone, you communicate with them. Or when you need to find directions or something, you use it for that, but not in times that you don't want to or need to. Like you control when you use the phone. The phone doesn't control when you use it.
Right?
Yeah. Being really like honest and like taking those like self-evaluations, not just like one and done, because you're changing as a person. And just like being like, well, in this season of life, am I using my phone a lot more? Like, why is that happening? And kind of just getting down to the root of it. And then as well as having like self-control to follow through with the boundaries that you set. Because like you're like, oh, I have boundaries, but like you never follow through with them. Like, then what's the point? You know, we're like saying this, but like I don't do it. So, you know,
A big thing for accountability, I think that both helps you connect with people in person better, but also just to hold each other accountable, is like just telling somebody, hey, I'd love to talk to you about something. Can you put your phone down? Or like, when you finish whatever you're doing, then can I talk to you? And then it prevents the whole situation of them picking up their phone while you're answering their question or while you're catching up. And it's kind of, it makes you feel like, oh, like I don't matter. You don't care about what I had to say.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there's an unspoken etiquette with phones where it's okay to check it every now and then.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay to like, I have a phone, I am available to people, but also like I'm focused in on you, versus I'm going to check my phone across the room, which you can do. But like most people are like, okay, if you check your phone every now and then, but it's really like constantly, consistently doing it during a conversation. And I think it's interesting because I think hopefully maybe not Access parents, but I do feel like a lot of parents see your generation as, oh, they're just always on their phones. And when they hang out, they're looking at their phones, but in a group or whatever it is. And it's, I mean, anecdotally, knowing you guys and seeing you hang out with your friends, I feel like I don't see that very often. Am I wrong in that? Or do you feel like you have that kind of faux pas of don't pull out your phone when we're talking? Do you feel like maybe it's a balance?
I feel strongly about people not pulling their phone out when I'm talking to them, just because I take it personally when even if they're just checking their texts from their mom. I'm like, it makes me feel sad. Yeah. But yeah, I would say that with the people that I hang out with in particular, I try to create kind of a culture of connecting and not being on our phones. But definitely, especially at school, I feel like in class, anytime, instead of just talking to the person next to you that maybe you don't know, it's just like, oh, let's just pull out the phone and just scroll on social media or play a game or something.
I definitely think that a lot of teenagers recognize the screenager stereotype and kind of want to avoid it, but it's really hard a lot of the time if you're like in a situation to not like just check texts or go on social media or something like that.
And then also there's this pressure, like we were talking about earlier, to respond. And so it feels like when you do choose to put your phone away, like put it on Do Not Disturb for a few hours, that's when you miss something. Yeah. Sometimes that happened. And then somebody's frustrated with you. Yeah, they need something. And so there's kind of this pressure to always be available to people and to always be ready to respond for if they need you. Yeah. And I think a lot of times that leads to the chronic use of the phone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's end with a fun question. If you could go back in time and live before there were smartphones, would you do that? Or is the smartphones too good?
I think I would definitely want to go back. I can only imagine how great it would be if I hadn't seen somebody for months and then I saw them and they hadn't been updated on social media about what I was doing and I had so much to tell them. I think that would just be so fun. So I would love to experience that.
It's like a Jane Austen thing. You're like writing really long letters.
Yeah. Improve my handwriting.
Yeah.
Great. I definitely agree. I think it'd be really fun to not have like the constant pressure and then worried about being like addicted to a phone. But I also think if I did, I'd really love to like have a way to like see people a lot easier. Because like definitely I can just hop on FaceTime and then call somebody who's on the other side of the world or something. Yeah. But that'd be the only like downside in my opinion.
Yeah. I think just the pure utility of the phone would be sorely missed. But like I was thinking about the other day, if you're like in the 80s or 90s or pre-internet era and you wanted to like research about something, you'd have to like walk to a library, look in an encyclopedia or like pick up a book on it. And like most information is now like 30 seconds away. And it would be hard to go back for that. Maybe like for a month or so, just a detox.
Well, thanks again for coming and chatting with us. I thought your answers were very well thought out, very deep. Hopefully it was helpful for the people who listened. So thanks for coming and being willing to share and just be open and honest about what you think of smartphones and your lives around these weird pocket rectangles that we don't have.
Thank
Thank you so much
for having us.